right. We're on chapter 25, Living for God's Glory. And see if I can pop this out here. Last number of weeks, we're talking about the lordship of Jesus Christ. What does Christ mean, by the way?
Anointed one?
Anointed one. And what does it mean that he's an anointed one?
He's a savior.
Messiah.
What's that?
Messiah.
Yeah, that's what the word Messiah means, anointed one. And yeah, so Savior's, why do you say Savior, Mike?
That is what the anointed one was anointed for.
Right, it's one of the reasons, that's one of the things, right?
One of the reasons.
Yeah. You think of the Psalm 2 that we've been reading, right, too, where he says, the very beginning of Psalm 2, the kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, right, let us burst their bonds apart, cast away their cords from us, meaning there's the Lord and his anointed one. That word is Christ, the anointed one. In Greek, Hebrew, it's Messiah. And God says he laughs at this attempt to throw off his bonds, which are his laws, the way he's designed the world. And they want to get rid of that. And the Lord laughs at that, holds them in derision, because it's like gravity. It's people fighting against gravity. After a while, it reveals itself, right? And then he says, then he will speak to him in his wrath and terrify him in his fury, saying, as for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. And I've said, I will tell the decree. The Lord said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage and the ends of the earth your possession. You will break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now, therefore, O kings, be wise, be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in his way. In the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. In who? In the Son, right? And who's he saying that to? He's saying that to kings, right? And all those who are rulers. And he's saying that this is my son. He is the king.
Yeah, I think that what he's really saying there is to all of the kings, this is the king.
Right. He's the King of kings and Lord of lords.
Total authority.
Right. So all the way back in Psalm 2, it was predicted, right, there was going to be this one who's an anointed one, the Christ, right? So that's...
He's even saying it to the fathers, because they have authority over, like you have authority over me.
In the family. Yeah.
Yeah, and so this is not his last name. This is his title, anointed one. And in the Old Testament, that means a lot. But specifically, you go to a psalm like Psalm 2, and you say, what it means that he's the Christ is that he's God's king, whom he set over all the nations, all the peoples of the earth. And he just says to Jesus, ask of me, and I'll give them to you as your heritage, as your people, actually. So we look at this again, lordship of Jesus Christ over some things. All. Why? Because Psalm 2 says that.
Mm-hmm.
And Psalm 110 says that.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the two most often quoted verses in the New Testament, with reason. Because there's a major theme in the New Testament that the writers are trying to get across to our thick skulls, right? Like this: Jesus Christ is Lord over all things, including every sphere that he's designed, right? Like the family, or the church, or what we're calling the civil sphere. And today we're going to be, well, what we talked about? We talked about marriage, just to do with the beginning of a family, and then out of the marriage between husband and wife, children, right? And today we're going to be talking about work, labor, which is a really important topic to figure out what sphere does work belong in. I think sometimes people have a whole separate sphere. They just call it labor.
I'd say all of them.
Okay. Why is that, Mike?
Well, I mean, in a family, obviously with the father being the head of the family, one of his obligations or responsibility is to work, earn money so that they can have shelter, food, etc.
Yeah.
You have the same type of work that goes on in the church by those that are in leadership positions as well as those that are in the congregation. They all have callings, they all have work, they all have vocations of some kind or other.
But also the church would not survive if it wasn't for the head of the family working and bringing money in to support not only his family, but also support the church.
That's right. Yep.
And it goes on to civil, because then you're paying taxes over there.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So now we're getting somewhere, aren't we?
Yeah, we're getting somewhere, yeah, paying taxes, yeah.
Right. And this is really important because in other worldviews, for example, Marxism, where would they put that? Where does labor belong?
So,
Civil.
In the civil?
Yep.
Yep.
In the Marxist, do I have a red pen? I don't.
you used to.
I used to. What happened to it? I need a
Put it
red
on the
pen.
corner there.
Yeah, where's that red pen? I should have it for Marxism. But it's really important, right? Because we live in a society that's either flirting with Marxism or they're already there for the most part, right? Put it in green for no reason, other than to say that this is what they want. Our idea of labor, right? That the work belongs to not to individuals, but it belongs to the laborers. It belongs to the community, right? And the government should have control over the labor.
This is how the unions got started.
Yes, it
That's how the
is.
union what?
That's how the unions got started, was so that there would be a group
Control.
that was in control of the individual workers.
And why? I mean, why do we even say this, right? Where does the Bible say either way? Or does the Bible say either way? Anybody think of what sphere or when God talks about work or his prophets talk about work? What's the context? Is it in the work? Where's the workplace? I
Are we
guess.
talking about physical labor or spiritual labor? Both intertwined, obviously.
What we're talking about is your vocation, your
Okay.
profession,
Or your calling.
So physical
your
labor.
calling. That's another word for it, right?
No, I think it's two separate things.
The vocation.
Yeah, vocation and calling, I think it's two different things.
Well, they have the same root word in Latin.
Well, I don't care what they got in Latin.
Well, yeah, you do. That's
So-
how the word comes from.
So like voco, right? Or voque. What's that sound like?
Vocal.
Vocal, right? Calling. And the point is, who calls you? It's God's calling on your life to be a farmer or a journalist or working at Deere or wherever, right? Or as a pastor. There's some verses actually that I put at the very top of this these notes. They weren't really specifically given, but I think they're pertinent to the idea of the scriptures, pertinent scriptures to working for God's glory.
Starts right there in Genesis.
Genesis 1:26, God says, let us make man in our image after our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, birds of the heavens, and over livestock, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.
Is that a vocation or is that a calling?
Well, I think it's both.
I think it's just calling. Because, the only reason I'm saying that,
Sure.
because it's where God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit said, the three of them said, we're gonna have these people will be over dominion over the creatures. So that is God's asking them, this is your calling.
Mhm.
Okay, now I think a vocation would be more what I am if I decide to become a farmer.
Okay.
Okay, that's what I'd say vocation, or become a teacher or a salesman. I would say that'd be a vocation.
So I think you're actually putting your finger on something that Perkins discussed in the chapter about there's a general calling and then what was the other word that he used? As opposed to general, he said the word personal calling.
Personal.
So that's how you're seeing these two different
Yes,
words,
that's
right?
how I would say it, yes. But
So,
I've been known to be wrong, so.
Once.
so personal calling,
Oh, that was on 353.
yeah, so like the calling as a Christian or an image bearer of God to take dominion, how personal for Terry, it was farming,
Yeah.
dairy farming, right? Well, that's good. So we communicated, and I see them as like using the same word. This is like a Latin root and the same idea, but
I think
it's helpful though.
when we get to Perkins, I think that he explains it in a way that it actually does combine the two. It combines both vocation and calling.
Yeah.
Because he stretches it out into your entire life.
Yeah.
In every aspect of your life.
That's good. Verse 28 of Genesis 1, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Subdue what? Subdue the earth, right? And have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And so here's the big call, right? Take dominion
That'd be a
over
calling by
everything.
God,
Yep. And
yes.
so how you explained it, big call. Now, how was he to do that? What was his vocation? Genesis 2:15, the Lord took the man and put him in the garden to work it and keep it.
Yes.
So sometimes Christians, they think of when God made Adam, he put him on the earth and everything was just ready to go. It was all taken, it was all under control.
Yeah.
The tractors were already there.
Yep,
Well, yeah, well, and all the bushes were planted already and they just sort of had to like go through the,
trees are already there to produce apples and everything.
Yeah, well, that was the case in the garden. He planted the garden, but there were boundaries, right? There was an in the garden and there was an out of the garden, right? Adam was made outside the garden and then God put him into the garden. And so then when they sinned, they went outside the garden, right? So there's an in the garden, there's an out of the garden. And how is Adam called to take dominion over all the earth? He's going to start working and keeping this plot of land, right? And eventually, the idea was that he was going to fill the earth with descendants,
It
right?
starts with things just
Kids.
that simple. It's
Yeah.
So simple as that.
Yeah, this is the idea of work, right? He was called to work and to keep.
So it's almost saying like you shouldn't just be able to just take this without any work and habits. Really, you should work to earn it. And stuff.
Ooh, that's important. Earn. That's right.
Yeah.
So work and protect. That's what keep means, right? And actually, this is the same word, serve. This word is usually translated work here. Elsewhere, it's serve and protect. And so, Ben, you brought up something. How did you say it? Are we talking about a spiritual vocation or?
Spiritual work or physical labor.
What's the difference?
They're intertwined. I said they're intertwined as
Okay,
well.
yeah.
Very much so.
Just to kind of pause and did I answer your question? I don't know if I did or not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm listening to what was being said. Kind of. I mean, I'm just kind of flowing with what's being said right now. Just kind of listening.
Okay.
And I had
Yeah.
some other thoughts too. And
Yeah.
what was actually specifically what was going through my head at that point in time when you asked me the question just now was that the curse on physical labor was that it would be toilsome, that it would be painful.
Mhm.
There's a curse, so that not that we're not to work itself is not the curse, that the toil, the curse is that we're toiling in our labor. I think that was addressed at the
He brings
outset.
it up, right?
I think one thing too that kind of lends with what Ben was talking about is that all calling, this is as we had talked about here earlier, all calling comes from God. God is spirit. Therefore, there has to be a spiritual element to the call.
So was there pretty much like no weeds pretty much at all in the garden? So like you just pretty much planted the seeds and he didn't have to toil and like,
Well, he did have to, he had to work, but it wasn't a pain in the
hard.
neck. In the curse, let's see here,
Thorns.
where he says thorns and
Weeds.
thistles, right?
Yep.
Which,
Number 7 on 352.
There's very little roundup in those things.
I was just thinking about, it didn't say no weeds, but it does say thorns and thistles, which causes pain, causes frustration, right? When you grab that weed that you want to pull and it's got thorns on it, boy, does that hurt,
And also, that
right?
with that thorn bush or whatever, also sucks moisture and
Yeah.
and nutrient that plant that you got there, like beans or corn,
Yeah.
to grow to their full potential. So they're denying that plant.
Yeah, I think how does he put it? He says something about it being, there's frustration because of it, and that's the idea. So there was still work to be done. Adam was actually, I think he was supposed to bring the outside into submission or dominion, right? To take it under control, right? So that would have included tilling the soil, for example, planting, and maybe some weeds, like some other plants that would fly in. But it wouldn't have been like those easy weeds you pull. Oh man, you think, oh, I wish.
Or
Wasn't there also,
Before they did that, their toil wasn't that hard, because you didn't have the weeds.
and wasn't
Would that
it
be
watering?
possible?
There's still work.
wasn't
Yeah,
there-
there's still
wasn't
work, you
there,
gotta plant the seed and harvest it, but you
watering?
don't have the weeds and all that in there until they disobeyed God. And then he put out, said, okay, now you're really gonna have to work now. You're gonna have to work and clean those weeds out and everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, cause like last summer, my mom would have me pull weeds out by the rose bushes.
Yep, all my brother roots, yep.
Like, it feels a lot different in the garden, like where the roses were, there were like hard weeds where you'd have to really pull them.
Mhm.
It's,
Why is that? Because the roots that the weed is attached to, also is probably feeding off those rose bushes.
yeah,
So there's an intertwining there.
Well, anybody else going to say something at this point? Exodus 20. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor. So the commandment is remember the Sabbath day. There's also the command to work for those 6 days and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is in your gates, within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So looking at this from the standpoint of the command to work, right? Well, maybe this question be first too. Like, who's he talking to primarily in this command? Who's the first listener?
The farmer, the caretaker.
The caretaker, and well, you said the farmer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or the caretaker.
Why do you think that?
Because that's the ones taking care of the plants, taking care of the animals, that God left that in there
Okay.
to take care of.
Yeah. And also, I mean, when you read the description, when he says your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, your livestock, the sojourner within your gates, who's he talking to primarily? Who's a person who has gates? Who's a person who has sons and daughters? Or male servants and female servants?
Family. I mean, the family itself has got that.
Yeah.
The king,
Well, in specific, well, there's the,
Yeah,
that's what I'm asking though, right? I mean, a king could be a father, right?
in general.
A person who owns a house.
Right.
But this is primarily, right, over here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And primarily to a father who's the head of the household, right? Who has a male servant, female servant, who owns the livestock,
owns the land.
owns the land, has the gates where okay, here's my property marker, here's how you enter, here's how you leave. And so I think that's a really important piece to this Exodus 20, especially talking about work, or how we usually call it labor, falls under this family sphere. Does that make sense? As to why this direction, especially with the 10 Commandments. Colossians 3:22-25, bondservants, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters, not by way of eye service as people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord, not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ, for the wrongdoer will be paid back for the wrong he has done, and there is no partiality. Is work a positive thing or a negative thing in this text?
Positive.
And why would you say that? Why is it a positive thing?
Nothing happens otherwise.
Okay.
You won't live.
Yeah. And just the thought that the Lord is actually going to reward for this work, right? The Lord's watching it. He's the one who's going to reward if you're not only that you're working, but how you're working as to the Lord, as to him, and not for man. And knowing that he'll give you the inheritance for your reward, you are serving the Lord Christ. And if you don't do that, you're going to be paid back for that too, right?
This is actually the foundation of what, at least in the secular sense, what they call work ethic.
Okay.
In other words,
Yeah.
this is a logical, ethical approach, to what the Bible gives us.
Yeah. So then there's another assumption going back to the commandment, the 10th commandment, the idea that labor is within the family, right? We've gone through the Industrial Revolution, right?
Yep.
Where people began to leave this and to go outside, right, to a factory or some other place of labor, right, to do that work primarily, right?
Farmers know all about chores and why they have so many kids.
That is why they have so many kids early on in
Yeah.
the
That's exactly,
teens and the 20s.
that's right.
So one of the things, like culturally, to recognize, like in our mind, like we've been trained and discipled by our own culture to think work is outside the family. So
Say that
sometimes
again.
it's that work is outside, this idea of labor is outside of the family. Whereas in the Bible, I think it actually contains it within. So when you think of your family, even people who are going into the family, the manservants and the maidservants, they're actually entering into a household situation, not a factory outside, right? And that's where labor is done.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
For example, the Amish would be the ones who holistically represent that idea.
Still,
Yes.
yeah. And that's one of the things I think they're trying to hold on to, which I say kudos to you, because it took me a long time to realize that in the Bible, work goes under here, and we shouldn't be communists and putting it over here.
And another group.
It's really helpful.
Also is organic farmers. They do not use modern chemicals in that to control weeds and grow their crops. So it's more of a family, hands-on farm for them to survive.
The Vosbergs, I think they like a lot of their kids. They have a lot of kids.
Mhm.
They work on the farm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're organic farmers.
Yeah. So even this idea of the home being the primary place of economy is very much lost. Normally we think of the family as a place of like what? Entertainment? Like you kind of go to veg, you go to sleep, and the home is, before it was this place, this is where most people worked. Right? And if they didn't work in their own home, they went to somebody else's home or farm where they did a lot of labor. Now that has been very much transformed, right?
Oh, yeah.
Why do you go home?
Or you
Well, you
work
might
in
go to eat, but most of the time we don't do that anymore, right? You go there to sleep, to watch some TV, and it's been, my point in all this, right, is just show how it's been transformed, and where people have devalued the family and the house.
You were talking before, thinking of work in the family or outside the family. if you think of work as a calling that is ordained by God, okay, there's not a reason in the world why that same thought could not be brought outside to the workplace.
'Cause like,
In other words, it becomes part of your life that you would take that and move it to an outside workplace. Because that's your life. That's what you do.
Mhm.
You know?
Well, and even what the workplace is, it's somebody's home gone into a different place.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
That's really how we should be thinking about
That's
it.
a good way
But
to
the
put
only
it.
thing that's different, so if you're working on a family farm, you're together. Every day,
Right.
you see it.
Mhm.
Now, you go outside that, you don't have that connection as a family.
But
Right.
you should.
And the point that I was making before
You
with the
could.
Industrial Revolution was John Deere decided to have a bigger building, bigger factory, right? But he still owned it and he called other workers into it, right? But the same idea, right? Thinking about it is, this is his family. He's calling people to come into it, but it's gotten so big. And when that happens, we lose this. We lose this idea of the family dynamic
Yep.
and that this actually belongs to this sphere. And control belongs to here, rather than, well, especially not here,
You
but
see-
especially not here either.
like you're,
You see so much today where you have people who are taking a job and doing whatever it is that they do and not caring one iota about the quality or the entire whole idea of being able to take a lifestyle and bringing it to that particular job. I mean, that's just lost.
Now, where do you
So
think your
there's-
lifestyle?
Well, in other words, you've got, you know that within the family, start there, okay? You know that responsibility is for God ordained. And knowing that you are doing what you're doing for God, that whole idea has just almost been eliminated. Because people don't take that to work with them outside the family. You know, and it's interesting too, because after having worked for enough companies, I mean, you can see individuals, and I'm saying individuals, who do care, who do have that kind of, work ethic in the outside job. And, thank God we do, because I think that's really what has made this country what it is. But now it's all being undermined.
One,
Where do you think, Dennis? Because you worked away from the home.
Yeah, kind of like what he's saying. I joined into the John Deere family. I work for
Yeah.
John Deere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
I tried to work the way Mike was saying we should work. Yeah, I cared about what I was doing.
Yep.
But I mean, I've had through my career out there, I had a lot of different jobs through the years. And some of them were just absolutely boring, just boring jobs. And,
But you still did the best of your
Oh,
ability.
you bet. I mean, I was working for the Lord. I guess I wanted to work in, kind of like Matthew 5. I wanted to work in such a way
Yeah.
that
Right.
people see it and glorify God.
Yeah.
Whether they did or not, I don't know. But
And this is what's going on here,
I aimed
right?
at that,
You're working for the head,
yeah.
but ultimately it's all for him,
For
right?
him.
This is the
in whatever,
connection.
in whatever sphere you're doing
Exactly.
work in. And the Bible, I think one of the sides I'm saying, I don't know if you had said this, but I heard somewhere else, but basically the correlation of servants and masters, it fits really well with employers and employees. And whenever you hear the phrase servant and master, and there's something that's laid out and you go through an expository manner, you can apply that to employers and employees.
Right. And why you can is
Yep.
because of this.
Yes.
That's where it all begins.
That's why you can do that. Is because of this framework, right, of saying, and actually even more than that. I mean, what a master is to his bondservant is the head of a household, who is the what? The father.
As
Right, so the relationship,
as a
right?
servant leader.
That's right. It should be one of a father
Yep.
to his sons, as it were. So that picture of Boaz, right, in the book of Ruth, it's just glorious, isn't it? He rides up and all of his workers are, hey, blessed are you, bro.
Mhm.
He's here. And they're all respectful of him and they love him.
Yeah.
And he loves them. He's caring for them. And he's aware of who, the different women who are, working on the side even, right?
He's out on the threshing floor.
It's his land. It's his grain
Yeah, he wasn't king.
that they're working in. So this is the idea of, right? The boss is the master, but even behind all that, those words, right? He's the head of the house. He's the father figure.
And he's watching.
Yeah.
All the people who work. I know my grandson works at a brewery up in Monticello, New Glarus area.
Yeah.
And he's only been there like 9 months, and at Christmas time, he got a huge bonus.
Wow, that's
And he
great.
said something to the owners, man, I've only been here a short time, why is such a big bonus?
Yeah.
And the boss said, you're not afraid to work.
There you go.
You're one of the young people
Yep.
That's
that
great.
will work,
That's great.
and we appreciate it.
That's great.
So they showed it to us.
He treated him like one of his own.
Yes.
Hey,
Yeah.
I'm going to thank you for
Yeah.
helping my
It's not-
establishment, my
Yes.
business, my family.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So
Go ahead,
he's watching
Ben.
over and seeing that. and
Yeah, that's great.
every
I was
word,
just
yeah.
thinking about all of these things, and one of the things, even though people in that civil sphere don't recognize Christ's lordship, we still do recognize it as Christians. It still exists, and so we still work in a manner that, we still see it going on. They may not see it. They may not even include that at all, because obviously, as an unbeliever, they're not going to see that. They're not going to know. But we still do our labor with that understanding, and we see that work itself out. So in this example, that's God
Mhm.
giving provision. Obviously, we don't deserve anything, but whatever He provides for us is good and is right and is a blessing.
You know, I think it's almost a progression where you have the family, and that's where it started. You've got the church, and that obviously has its own sphere as well. But by the time you get out to the civil area, that whole idea of people caring about what they do, walk into the DMV someday and ask if, do you actually care about anything? And that's the difference.
well, they should, but there's been a breakdown.
Yeah.
But I think like Ben is saying, though, in the workplace, that your boss and even your comrades are working with you. They see your work ethic. They see that you're a Christian.
Yeah.
And even some of that carries over to them,
Yeah.
that maybe they might, wow, I can do better.
Yeah, and this goes back to the original. We don't make Jesus Lord. He is Lord.
He already is.
There's a big time difference,
Yeah.
right? You walk into the workplace,
Yes.
acknowledging that, not saying, okay, if we get enough people, majority wise, 51%, then he'll be Lord.
Mhm.
No, it's just like gravity, right? If everybody says there's no such thing as gravity, guess what? It's still going to fall.
Yeah.
Right? The same thing applies with Jesus and his lordship over our labor and over responsibility, fatherly responsibilities of bosses, and the responsibility, like a son, of employees to their boss, right?
Yep.
Ephesians 4:28 puts labor not only under the category of the fourth commandment, but also the eighth commandment. Let the thief no longer steal. What's the opposite of stealing? Some people think not stealing.
Giving.
Yeah, giving.
Right? Yeah, giving is actually right. So, and not only just giving, because you can give, the government gives, right? You get it. The government gives so much, but why do they give? What are they giving? They're giving money that they actually received from somebody else, right? Or took from somebody else.
Almost sort of like we're.
He says the idea of let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone who's in need. The opposite of stealing is working honestly with your own hands in order to give.
What's that cartoon where you got the grasshopper who sits around all summer long with a fiddle and he don't plan anything? Who's the other guy?
Oh, it's the ants.
The ants.
Is it Ant
Ants.
that works and gets all this food?
Right.
And this grasshopper comes in and, hey, I did, help me here.
Same idea.
Yeah,
All the squirrels, same way.
yeah.
So I've actually listed, besides those scriptures, sort of kind of getting us grounded a little bit about what the Bible says, also the Westminster Larger Catechism about the Eighth Commandment, and how to actually mentions what duties are required, which is interesting. Actually, toward the end, oh boy, the second from the last, actually, he actually says a lawful calling. So how do I not steal? What are the duties required at the very end? A lawful calling and diligence in it, frugality, avoiding unnecessary lawsuits, suretyship, or like other engagements, and an endeavor by all just and lawful means to procure, preserve, and further the wealth and outward estate of others, as well as our own.
That's a big one.
Isn't that amazing?
That's a big one.
So that's the larger Westminster Larger Catechism. And then he says, what sins are forbidden. And of course, theft and robbery and man stealing, receiving anything that's stolen, fraudulent dealing, false weights and measures, removing landmarks, injustice and unfaithfulness in contracts between man and man or in matters of trust, oppression, extortion, usury, bribery, vexatious lawsuits. Isn't that funny? Oh, it just keeps going on and on. That's forbidden. Unjust enclosures and depredation, engrossing commodities to enhance the price, unlawful callings, and all other unjust or sinful ways of taking or withholding from our neighbor what belongs to him, or of enriching ourselves, covetousness, inordinate prizing and affecting worldly goods, distrustful, distracting cares and studies in getting, keeping, and using them, envying at the prosperity of others, as likewise idleness, prodigality, like the prodigal son, wasteful gaming, and all other ways whereby we unduly prejudice our own outward estate and defrauding ourselves of the due use and comfort of the estate which God has given us. A lot there, right? This kind of brings us to this, now to these notes from the chapter that we read, how he says, Ray Penning, I think, right? He was the author. We need to think about work and reason based on the Bible, not only on human reasoning. And he begins by defining the Protestant work ethic, and he uses the Encyclopedia Britannica, right?
Mm-hmm.
It says the value attached to hard work, thrift, and efficiency in one's worldly calling, which, especially in the Calvinist view, were deemed signs of an individual's election or eternal salvation.
What do you mean by individual election?
What did he mean? And this actually kind of gets into Max Weber's caricature, right?
Election as a choice?
Well, he's talking about God's election
Oh, okay. Yeah.
as viewed by Calvinists. And so Max Weber, who was a Marxist, he looks at this Protestant work ethic that exists in America, most of America, some of America. And he wants to say where it came from, right? He's trying to show that it came from the Calvinists.
Mm-hmm.
Is he Christian?
And no,
No, he's the opposite.
he's a Marxist who's trying to show how capitalism is wrong. And we need to get away from that. And so one of the ways that he's doing that is trying to show that the foundation of capitalism is in these good for nothing Protestant Puritans, these Calvinists. That's what he's trying to do, basically. And so one of the ways that it's gotten into the Encyclopedia Britannica is that it's actually described in the way that Max Weber has caricatured Calvinism. Did you notice that?
Mhm.
And so, but Terry, you're getting at the signs of an individual's election.
Yeah.
And does anybody, I think that was one of the questions. What was Max Weber's view of the Calvinist or the Protestant work ethic? What did he say about it? Does anybody remember?
Well, as it relates to salvation, he says Weber started with the premise that a Calvinist could never really know whether or not he was saved,
If he's elected.
since salvation was a result of God's decree. And it became a conviction of salvation. So Weber's term for assurance comes from seeing good works in a person's life.
Right. So his view of Calvinism was that Calvinists taught that God chooses who goes to heaven, who goes to hell.
And that's it.
And how do we know if I'm going to heaven, how I'm going to hell? One of the ways that we know, or at least in his view, how the Calvinists taught was, is God blessing me? and I'm working and I'm seeing a lot of fruit in my life, well, that means
Yeah,
God's on my side.
Yes,
That's his caricature of Calvinism.
Yeah.
When he hears about election and total depravity, et cetera,
well,
that's his
and he ties
basis.
capitalism to that as well.
Right,
In other words, if you are a wealthy banker or, a leader of a big organization or whatever, doing very well for himself, obviously he's
he's going to heaven.
He's in God's graces. Oh, yeah.
well, that's their caricature, that's their
Yeah.
wrong picture.
That's
Of
not
what
the
Calvinism-
Calvinist view, though.
No,
Correct.
it certainly isn't.
But this is a Marxist who's trying to say, see how ridiculous that is?
It's trying to justify it.
God's arbitrary whims determine
Yeah.
who's in, who's out, and whoever's in is the one who's actually going to flourish and do better. This is why they want to say things like equality and right across the board, equality of outcome, et cetera, et cetera. And all I have to say, this is wrong. So he actually, in the book, it actually says that this has been used to promote prosperity theology, which emphasizes person when they follow God, God will bless all the time and bless them in material things. That's the big point of prosperity theology. Give God $50, sow a seed of $50. Have you ever heard this? And he'll give you $5,000 in fruit back. So some of this is stemming from this idea. So thus, if you don't possess such reward, you must have been in disobedience, and this leads to more guilt and shame, right? You see how something they paint this caricature of the Puritan Calvinist God, whose result has been right-wing. What was this? How did he call it? He said right-wing free market.
They're trying to paint a different color on what it is.
Right, exactly.
That's a good point.
But they can't.
And so part of us even talking about this is to realize how people out there on the other side, how they want to paint us, right? To realize